Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study, Fresh Light. I want to start out tonight a little bit different by telling you a story about something that happened to me last week. And believe it or not, even though it may not seem like it fits in with the Bible study, pay attention because later on you'll find out that it really does. How many of you have ever been in a situation, especially if you're driving, where you come across or where somebody cuts you off, or excuse me a second, somebody cuts you off or passes you on a double yellow or whatever, and you wonder, where are the cops? Where are the cops in a situation like that? Well, we were driving in southern Minnesota last week and pulling a camper and following up behind a car that was going slower than I would have liked to have gone, but hey, I couldn't get around him because of traffic and because of uh, curves and hills and things like that. So I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden, I notice out of my side mirror, this guy comes flying around me on a double yellow line and tries to get past me. When he gets past me, realizes there's another car in front of me. There's oncoming traffic coming. So I had to slow down to let him in between to avoid the crash. The oncoming car had to slow down and pull over to the side to avoid the crash. And this clown, uh, you know, made it, but just by, a little bit. And a little bit later, passes the guy in front of me on a curve. And I'm just thinking, this guy is nuts. Where are the cops when you need them? Well, a few miles down the road, we came to another small town, and I noticed, it's one of those really small towns in southern Minnesota where you can drive into the east side and see clear to the west side. And I noticed off in the distance, I noticed red and blue flashing lights. A police officer pulled somebody over. And as we were driving through town, my wife and I were kind of joking about, wouldn't it be nice if he caught the guy that passed us illegally? And he had. We kind of chuckled because the guy that had gotten stopped going through town was the same guy that passed us illegally. I got to admit, I would have loved to have pulled off to the side, run back to the police officer and say, well, you're giving me a ticket for speeding. You can give him a ticket for illegal passing, reckless driving. I didn't do that. But so what does that have to do with the book of Obadiah? Well, hang on, because I'm going to hopefully show you by the time we get to the end of our study. We're going through the Old Testament, as you know, and thank you to those of you that have been watching. If you are encouraged by the study tonight, or if you have been following us for a while, again, please put a comment in the comment line. Um, and also, if you wouldn't mind sharing this on your social media page, that'd be great. One other little advertisement here as we get ready for our study, and that is, if you are used to watching us here on Facebook, please check out my YouTube channel. Have some other things there. Also, gives you and then if you wouldn't mind subscribing to that, I'd really appreciate it. So, the book of Obadiah, we are on to the fourth of the 12 major prophets. If you remember, we talked about the books of prophecy, and there's the major prophets and then the minor prophets. Minor prophets are only considered minor prophets because of the length of the book, certainly not because of the importance of the message or the depth of the message. So we're on minor prophet number 4 of 12, which means we're getting close to the end of our Old Testament study. We're going to be taking a few weeks off here, 1 week for Thanksgiving. We'll be here Wednesday night for Thanksgiving, but kind of get away from um, the minor prophets for that. And then also during the month of December, during that Advent season, spending some time on that. So we're going to take a little break from the Old Testament like we've been doing throughout this study to take a few other directions. But last week we talked about the prophet Amos, and if you remember, I try to give each book a title to sort of remind ourselves of the fact that grace runs through the entire Old Testament, not just a New Testament thing. And last week, talking about Amos, and we talked about expressive grace, about how God expresses his grace to us. Tonight we look at Obadiah. Obadiah is one of the 5 books in the Bible that is only 1 chapter long. So it's a very short book. Obadiah, Philemon, 2nd and 3rd John, and Jude are the 5 books in the Bible that only have one chapter to them. So oftentimes, if you look, there won't even have a chapter number, it'll just have verse numbers. Obadiah was that. Obadiah is another interesting book, as was Amos, in the sense of that we don't know who Obadiah was. There were 12 Obadiahs listed in the Bible. Obviously, this is one of them. We don't know which one it was because the book of Obadiah doesn't give us any indication of who he was, nor does the book of Obadiah give us an idea of the date that he was written. A lot of times, some of the prophets will make mention of one king or another king, and then we can kind of guess from that, surmise from that, when the book was written. But we can't do that with Amos. We don't know who he was. We don't know when he wrote the book. We do know that his name means worshiper of God. Most likely, he lived around the time of the prophet Elijah, or Elisha, rather. And most likely, because of some of the things that he says, we have an idea that he may have lived in or around the area of Jerusalem. And part of the reason for that is because most of his message is against the country, the group of people that were the Edomites, or people that lived in the region of Edom. If I were to give Obadiah a nickname, a title, I think I would give it the title of Humble Grace. And the reason I give it that, and as we'll see as we continue our study, is because humility is a big deal for God, and He expects us to be humble. And when Obadiah is giving his message to the Edomites, the main thing, the main theme that he uh, pursues in his teaching is that God hates pride. In fact, just let me read you the first few verses of the book of Obadiah. Verses 1 through 4, it says, "The vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, 'Rise up and let's go against her for battle.' See, I will make you small among the nations, and you will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, and you make your home in the heights, and you say to yourself, 'Who can bring me down to the ground?' Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord." So that those few verses, and then it goes on from there, talks about the fact that God hates pride, and that's what he really was chastising, speaking against to the Edomites. So, the Edomites, who were they? Well, it's an interesting story in who the Edomites were. As I said, they were a nation of pride. They thought they were better than the rest of the family. They were part of the Jewish family, the Israelites, um, but distant relatives. They were proud of their location. They were mostly a mountain tribe people, and they were in an area where it was very difficult to be attacked. So they were proud of that. They had a lot of money. They were well off because of their farming, and so they didn't feel they needed anybody. And they thought that they were very popular, that they had a lot of allies. They would find out later on in their life that, in fact, later on, Obadiah even talks about the fact that they were defeated by these very people they thought were their allies. So even though they were very prideful, their pride is what brought them down. Who are the Edomites? Well, if you remember back to Abraham, Abraham had Isaac. Isaac was the son of promise, and Isaac had two children. Or had several children, but two children in particular. One was Jacob, and the other was Esau. He had a set of twins. There were others as well, but those two are the important ones in the family. Esau was the firstborn of the twins. In fact, as the Bible talks about it, is that he started to be born, and then Jacob pulled him back in and came out, but Esau was really the first one born. So these two were fighting from literally from the time of their birth, that they had conflict between these two twins. Esau was the oldest, and back in this culture, the oldest child received twice the blessing of everybody else, and so it was called the birthright. So Esau, being the oldest, was going to get, the way it worked out is that if when the father died, when the patriarch died, he would divide up his inheritance and give it to his children. And if he had 10 children, we'll say, then the oldest would get two portions. So they would divide it up 11 ways if there were 10 kids, and the oldest would get two, and then everybody else would get one portion of each. So Esau was the oldest. He would get two portions of the inheritance. He was considered to be the most important person in the family next to dad, who was Isaac. Jacob was the second born, and second born, we know, second birth child, I'm one, are just nothing but trouble anyway. So the story goes, and you can read about this back in Genesis. Sorry I didn't write it down, but you can check it out for me. The story goes that Jacob was at home and he was making a meal, and Esau was a hunter. Jacob was a gardener. He was a farmer. He liked to go out and pick, the crops and come in, and he was making this wonderful meal. And Esau came in from hunting and was starving. Now, if you're coming in from hunting and you're starving, what does that tell you? You didn't get anything. And he came in and he was hungry, and he said to Jacob, he said, "Give me something to eat." And Jacob says, "No, I'll give you something to eat. I'll give you some of this soup if you give me your birthright." That was a huge thing. Normally would be a huge thing to ask. That's asking Esau to give up his entire inheritance for a bowl of soup. Just didn't make sense, except for the fact that Esau didn't care about the birthright. Esau didn't care about any of that, and so he said to Jacob, "So what good's a birthright to me if I'm dead? Sure, here you can have the birthright." So he handed over the birthright to uh, Jacob, and then Jacob became the one that was God's blessing, God's blessed child, so to speak. Jacob, who was renamed Israel, eventually became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and we've already talked about that history as it's gone on. But that was the beginning of a conflict and an antagonism between these two. After Esau 8, he had second thoughts about what he had done, and he became angry with Jacob for taking the birthright, even though Esau gave it up. And Esau was also, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Esau's name was changed to Edom. And so Edom was, the Edomites rather, were the descendants of Esau, and they carried on the strife that Jacob and Esau had. Even though Jacob and Esau eventually reconciled, there was that animosity that had continued throughout history, and the Edomites were a result of that. Um, One of the reasons that God was so angry with the Edomites is because Israel was attacked and defeated. In fact, there's some people that believe that Obadiah may have written during the exile. That's a little bit later date than some put it. Some put it earlier than that. But Edom was celebrating the fact that Israel was attacked and that Israel was taken down. And they were, in fact, they helped with that. They helped with the battle to defeat Israel. And God wasn't happy about that. The Israelites weren't happy about that, but there was just this constant struggle between these two people groups. And that was one of the reasons for the story, the prophecy that Obadiah wrote concerning them. Um, so I think the main lesson that we can take from Obadiah is don't mess with God's people. Don't mess with God's people. In fact, in Obadiah, it says very clearly that the people of Esau, the Edomites, would be wiped off the face of the earth. And there's no record of them after a certain time period. The Edomites completely disappeared, and they have not been, there's no people group to be tied with them. So, what can we learn from Obadiah? I think there's, short as the book is, I think there's 5 things that we can learn from the book of Obadiah. The first one is that God has the right and authority to choose who he will use and how he will use them. One of the problems that Esau had back in the day of Jacob and Esau, is that God chose Jacob over Esau, and Esau was the oldest. He was supposed to get chosen first. And I think sometimes we need to be careful because we see other people succeed. We see other people doing the same things that we do, and they're successful and we're not, and we get angry. We get angry at them. We get angry at God. And God has a right to bless people how he's going to and where he's going to. So we need to be careful not to get angry when other people are succeeding. The other thing is God hates pride. And one of the reasons that he hates pride is because it deceives us into thinking we're more than we really are. It deceives us into thinking that we can do things that God has no intention of us doing. And in fact, the very story of Satan falling from heaven was because he had pride. Pride is what destroyed Adam and Eve. Pride is what destroyed King Saul. Pride has grace runs through the Bible. We can find the story of grace all the way through the Bible. But parallel to that almost is pride. It's kind of like the light and the dark. You've got the good news of grace, but you've got the bad news of pride that runs all the way through the Bible, all the way through the lives of people. God hates pride because pride really is me saying, I don't need anybody but me. And God wants us to need him and to realize that he is there for us. The third lesson I think we can learn from Obadiah is that God's righteous judgment will overcome any reliance on physical and mental strength. God will bring judgment, and that's the fourth statement is God is jealous for his children and he'll protect us. Right now, you may feel like you're under attack for your faith. Good for you. In fact, James tells us, he says, if you're going through trials, that's a good thing. And that doesn't sound very pleasant, but what he's really saying is, the unspiritual will always celebrate the downfall of a quote unquote spiritual person. That's why the media just loves to latch on to when somebody that is a pastor or somebody that's involved in a religious ministry falls and gets caught in a sin. They just love that. They eat it up because everybody wants to see the good people fail, and they want to get that, and that's part of pride. And God is jealous for his children. He will protect us from that if we just hold on to his grace and hold on to his word. And then the fifth thing that we can learn from Obadiah, which kind of ties in with those, is that God will hold us accountable when we gloat over enemies. Now, I started the story out about my story about driving through southern Minnesota. I started the story out tonight about talking about how I was so happy to see this young man pulled over, and who knows, maybe he got a ticket, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But at the time, I hoped he did. God doesn't want us to gloat over that. And I think we need to realize that, especially, right now there's so much division in the country. There's so much division just within the church. I see on social media so many times people criticizing this person for doing that or that person for doing that. We spend more time criticizing each other than we do loving on each other. And we need to learn to do that. God holds us accountable when we gloat over our enemies. That's one of the reasons why I struggle with this, I'll be honest with you, but that's one of the reasons why there's certain people that hold to certain political persuasions, that hold to certain uh, social ideas that I am trying to learn to pray for their salvation, to pray for their blessing like Jesus tells us to. It's hard to do because, face it, people that are not nice to you, you don't want to be nice back to them, and you certainly don't want God to be nice to them. But that's what he asks us to do. And he holds us accountable when we don't do that. So those are the lessons from the book of Obadiah, a very short book. Again, as usual, I encourage you to read it. Find an easy to read translation. Just read through it. It's only 20 some verses long. And kind of glean some things from that. Ask Jesus to help you with that. We'll be back next week to look into another book of the Old Testament. And then, as I said, we're going to take a little bit of a break for Thanksgiving and Christmas as far as the topic. And then we'll get back into this sometime in January. Let's have a word of prayer together. Lord, thanks for tonight. And I thank you for the book of Obadiah and the lesson it teaches us. Pray that you'd help us to be a humble people, reach out to each other, to love those that don't love us, and to celebrate the grace that we have in you. I pray these things in your name. Amen. Hey, thanks for listening, for watching, everybody. Again, if you wouldn't mind sharing this on your timeline, I would really appreciate it. I'd also appreciate some comments if this has been helpful to you. Sunday morning, if you're not going to church anywhere and you're in the Luck, Frederick, Cumberland, Wisconsin area, stop on in and join us. Praise starts at 10. If you're from a distance away but you don't have a church home, or you do have a church home but you want to watch my service, um, again, praise starts at 10. We're on both YouTube and on Facebook. See you then. Thanks for coming in, everybody.